Welcome back to Aware and Awake. I'm so excited today to talk about our origins, the story beyond the textbooks. I'm Steve Lannon.
I'm Morgan Harem. Thanks so much for joining us. So, what came first? It's that chicken and the egg question. Did consciousness come from biology? Did biology come from consciousness? Both of us lean towards that idea that biology is an expression of consciousness, that consciousness is all pervading. And so, in that, it expressed itself in the myriad forms, right? The cells, the plants, the animals, the fungi, and that's where we are. So souls existed way before this planet. Do you
Right.
have more to say about that?
Yeah, I would say that consciousness is kind of like the ladder. It's like the structure. Uh, so within that structure, biology is really just content within the structure. So the structure can support all sorts of things. It can support planets, biology, space, anything. Consciousness is all pervading. And so within consciousness, you can build worlds, you can build universes, and that's pretty exciting because all the stuff that we see within this world, within this reality that we call what we call reality, we're experiencing as if it's real, but it's really all just built on that structure of consciousness, that baseline, that base foundation of consciousness, which is the basis of all existence. Everything we know is based in consciousness. Yeah.
So, why did Earth come about?
Well, it's a really good question. I, we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure why Earth came about, except we feel like, Earth was really created to be like an experiment in a way. The Elohim being, we're going to tap into them later, but they're like a being that's really close to source. They're like almost godlike in a way. And the Elohim are creators, and they came and created Earth and helped humankind come onto Earth, created life here, and created a beautiful place for us to experiment. And so it's kind of like an experiment in a sense. And so they came here and they created us. They created the animals, the plants, and allowed evolution to happen. But they were also coming in along the way to make slight changes here and there. Earth is like a classroom. It's unusually dense as planets go. It's a dense place, so these bodies are dense. There's a lot of density here, and that. What does that really mean? Well, there are planets where there's just light bodies, where bodies aren't really incarnated, or they're incarnated with bodies that are really much more lightweight. You just don't have all the heaviness that we have here, and so density is one of the aspects of Earth. It's emotionally intense. So, we can express emotions, we can express ourselves in all sorts of different ways. That's part of what Earth is. And what else? What else would you say?
The yogic system talks about Earth being a middle planet, that there's higher planets above that are a little more like heavenly and utopian, and then there's lower planets that are a little bit, there's more suffering, right? And so our karma lands us in one of those planets, above, below, or right here in the middle. And this middle place is like the place where we get to learn the most because there's this balance.
And all this stuff comes from people that have channeled this information. We don't have anybody that's physically gone outside this world to another world and experienced these things or learned these histories. We're just getting this through people that have channeled or gone to deep hypnosis or experienced a past life as something else. So one facet of Earth is that it has an unusual amount of free will. Like evidently, a lot of other places you don't have as much free will. I've personally experienced past lives without as much free will, and it's limiting. It feels limiting, but here we have quite a bit of free will. You can have a life where you go down a positive track. You can have a life where you go down a negative track, and you can constantly choose. Every day you have choices to make, and you can choose whatever you want. And it doesn't just take you off of Earth if you choose something that might be negative or whatever it is. So it's like you can really choose your life here, choose your own adventure, if you will, which just makes it kind of an exciting place. And I think that's part of the experiment that they're kind of started creating in the first place. It's fascinating, but it's also it's an interesting place to be. But we're not being puppeted either. I think it's important to say that we're not being puppeted by the Elohim. We've been set off on our own to make decisions and to help form this earth in the way that we will. And we'll talk about that in a little bit because we have gone astray a few times as humans and have had to kind of had the reset button pushed. So this is a place where you can have a lot of, as we talked about before, you can have a lot of soul evolution here because it's so challenging to be here. This is the perception of beings that are outside of Earth. They say Earth is a challenging place. So if you come here, you're like, wow, I'm going to go for some high level soul evolution, but you can also easily get lost in the karma, right? You come in to do something amazing. You come in to be some almost like a saintly person, and perhaps you get wrapped up in or trapped up in video games, or doom scrolling, or drugs, or alcohol, or something just kind of derails you in a way, and so you pass over and you realize, oh, I didn't do exactly what I thought I was going to do. Now let's come back and try again.
Yeah,
right?
going back to that idea of the multiple planets, it's like in those higher planets, when everything's beautiful and utopic, it's hard to learn lessons there, right? Because it's like pain can be a great motivator for change. And then when you're in extreme suffering, it can be hard too to get out of that and learn. So you need just the right balance of like, here's some rewards, here's some suffering to help guide you. And that's where Earth really is like that middle ground that helps us learn what we came to learn.
That's a really good point. We have a lot of opportunity here to like do many, many different things, right? We have a lot of, it's like the scope of what you can do is huge, and some of them are, you can feel that pain, you feel that heartbreak, but you also feel, you go to the Mount Shasta or the Grand Canyon, you see the beauty of Earth, and it's just like, oh, and then you can feel that bliss and that oneness. You can feel all these, the spectrum of feelings is quite wide here for emotions, and that's a very special thing about Earth that not many other places have, to our understanding.
So, I want to talk about the history, right? And where did we get our history? Like, I learned a lot in school, but how much of that was accurate? We all got these sort of same lessons about the evolution of humans, and just last week, when I heard about this book called Forbidden Archaeology. In that book, it was introduced that we've all heard of Lucy, right?
Right.
Lucy,
she's like that early skeleton they found.
Yeah. Australopithecus, I think it was called.
I'm not going to try to say that, but yes, that's the one, I'm sure.
She's from anywhere between 3 and 4 million years ago, right? And,
okay.
They discovered her skeleton, but the Forbidden Archaeology book says that these archaeologists were shocked that she had a modern day skeleton, and it didn't fit the paradigm. So because it didn't fit the paradigm, and they would have to rewrite all the textbooks and historic texts ever written, then and they'd have to admit they were wrong. They took a composition of different bones from different species, put it together to reshape her so that she looked more like quadrupedic.
Okay.
Like where she walked and was, hunched over, more ape-like, with her, her hands on the ground a lot.
Wow. Somebody tampering with history? No, that would never happen. So basically what Morgan's saying is these archaeologists, maybe working with government entities or whatnot, replaced bones, right? To actually make a different narrative about Lucy, to show that Lucy was dragging her knuckles on the ground rather than walking upright like a normal human being 3.2 million years ago, right?
Yeah, I was reading that Charles Darwin didn't have any proof when he wrote that we evolved from apes.
Right.
This was like a theory, the
theory of evolution.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, a theory. Like it's never been fully proven, right? It's just a theory still.
Right. So then these archaeologists that actually discovered the modern skeleton are realizing, well, modern humans have been here for millions of years, not just 100,000.
Right. So let's talk about like where else we've done this with history. I know you mentioned something with horses, and you probably have some information to talk about with that. So let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, a little segue, but this highlights the how history is kind of locked in by a narrative. So we all learned in history class, right, that Spaniards brought the horses over. and then they were set free. So then Native Americans were able, and the indigenous were able to get wild horses and use them. They figured out how to ride them and bring them into battle. But um, texts write that the horses originated in North America, and that was like 6 million years ago. And they were 14-inch tall, and they had four toes on each foot. Okay. And then eventually they lost a toe, they got bigger. They lost another toe, they got bigger, so they could run faster and faster. And they evolved into what looks a lot like the modern day horse, and it's called Equus ferus ferus. So,
Equus ferus ferus.
yeah. And those horses crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Eurasia. So
so they came from the North America and went into Eurasia, not the opposite.
Exactly.
Or well, not the Spaniards bringing them on ships, and yeah,
which they did. They did bring.
They brought horses, so they went. So they went full circle at that point. Horses had circumnavigated the earth by the time they came back on the Spanish ships. Okay.
Exactly. So think about the modern story, and just stop and pause and think about what you think of. Are horses native to North America or not? Because most people would say they're not native. Well, where did that narrative come from? And I lived out west, and the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is treating the horses, the wild horses, that they're treating them like they're non-native. So round them up, domesticate them, and put them in homes, right? So people can adopt them for like $125.
So this narrative has changed how we deal with horses in the West. Rather than dealing with them as natural wild species, they're dealing with them as like an invasive species almost, and
exactly,
and then domesticating them.
And why is that?
Wow.
Why would the BLM want that? Well, because they can sign a lease and sell the land to ranchers to put their sheep and their cattle on. So they're making money off of leasing the land out. The horses are competitors for the sheep and the cattle because they need to eat those very few grasses that are out west, and so it's very convenient to say, oh, they're not native. But we have found fossilized bones of horses, like modern day horse skeletons that predate the Spaniards' arrival.
Okay, so that's just bringing that full circle back to where we started.
Exactly.
That's just showing that we've not gotten history right many, many times, and sometimes it's just somebody's written history in the way they wanted, and it became the narrative. It became it. The textbooks just picked that up, and we became starting. Everybody just repeats it. When you repeat it, you believe it, right?
Exactly.
So interesting. So this is how we got here. That's why today's talk is going to be so interesting, because we have so much information to bring to you that's different than what was shown in the textbooks when you were in school. So moving forward, according to Bashar, who's channeled by Daryl Anka. Daryl Anka is a channeler. He lives out in L.A. He runs an escape room, interestingly, but he channels Bashar. Bashar is an entity he's been channeling for 40 years, and Bashar is like a first world specialist. And a first world specialist, an ET, that comes through Daryl Anka to tell us information. If you're interested, there's lots of resources about Bashar. He doesn't actually have his own site, so you have to go just search for YouTube. You can search for different videos on YouTube, but go find him and listen to some of his stuff, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So he's basically said, and this is confirmed through some other sources, that Earth already had an evolving hominid species, part of an experiment from the Elohim we just talked about, right? So the hominid species was created by the Elohim, and it was consciousness, really which is a consciousness close to source that creates the blueprint of humanity and Earth in general. And many other ET civilizations have contributed to our genetic material over time. This is all part of the experiment, all part of the plan. So it was all going toward the blueprint that the Elohim created, and moving into that blueprint and moving along that blueprint as they expected. Well, then there was an interesting event that happened. So Bashar postulates that the Anunnaki, which is another ET race, that came to harvest gold here. Gold, right? Gold's a valuable resource. Well, evidently it's valuable outside of Earth too. They were their planet was dying. Their atmosphere of their planet was in trouble because it was the sun was breaking through and their planet was heating up. And they knew that using gold, like tiny flecks of gold in the atmosphere, would actually reflect the sun. I don't claim to know how that works. That's just the story that Bashar has told us. They came here to harvest gold to bring it back to their planet to save their planet. Well, when they got here, they found us, humans, right? And they found us in the current state that we were, and they were like, oh, it's too much work for us to do this gold harvesting. Why don't we use these humans as laborers, right? As you could call that forced labor, or we don't know how that looked, but they eventually were like, well, let's work with these beings that are already here because they're naturally here, and they are natural to this planet, so they're used to being here. So we don't have to do much to help them work with us. And so they were really good at DNA manipulation. That was one of the things that they were really advanced at. They had advanced DNA manipulation and DNA modification. So they tied our DNA in with some of their DNA to make us more amenable to being workers. And they started having us harvest gold for them. Well, this was not part of the grand plan of the Elohim. So when this was found out by, you could call it the Galactic Federation, or basically this group of ETs that helps protect and look after multiple planets, they said, no, you can't do this. You're not supposed to do this. This was an experiment. You weren't supposed to interfere or touch these people. And the Anunnaki were like, well, it's too late. We already did. And so they were like, well, you have to basically let them go, free them, and then leave the planet. And so they did. They left the planet, and they were also in charge of kind of caring for us in a way, without being seen or heard too much, to make sure we were able to get back on track to what the Elohim had first imagined. And so this is the alternate, and this happened between 100 and 200,000 years ago. So this was before any civilizations that we have heard about. So this is how we became a modern human, which is actually a hybrid species of multiple ET races, as well as something that evolved here, created initially by the Elohim. So we evolved on Earth, but we're also a part of a bunch of different ET races. I mean, do you ever wonder why we get sunburned and no other animal gets sunburned, right? Well, it's because part of us is not from here. That's my theory, and I'm going to stick to it. But part of us is not from here, and so we're not totally used to this planet because part of us is from other planets and was evolved there and then brought here as DNA. So we are a mix of many, many different species of ETs, and that this is what makes Earth such an interesting place to be, because this is a place where this has never happened before, where so much DNA has been mixed into a being, and this being is kind of let loose with free will to figure out how they're going to inhabit the planet, what's going to happen, and boy, wham bam, here we are, with our modern technology, the internet, and all the things that are happening today. So that was a mouthful, but that's really where we started. And Bashar has seen this, and there's been other people that have stepped in to say this is the true history. The Anunnaki did come here. They're actually referenced in the Bible and other things as giants or big beings. There's a lot of references to that. The Garden of Eden, in fact, was one of the Anunnaki genetic modification places. It was an actual lab where they were doing genetic modification, and they made the first hybrid with the Anunnaki injected within us. And so this is all part of this. This is all part of what Bashar has told us. All part of our actual history, and something we're actually going to receive from the ETs once we have disclosure. Is we're going to have a holographic history of this stuff. So at that point, this video will no longer be relevant because we'll have a holographic history of everything that happened. And so we can go back and look at that and you'll be able to see the truth of how we came to be who we are today, rather than what was told to you in the textbooks. Yeah. So very exciting history that we have. And there's lots of pieces actually buried around the world that actually show us this history pretty clearly. But those pieces are being protected. Why haven't they dug under the Sphinx? Why haven't they dug under the pyramids when they've used, radar and things to find that there are things under there? There's tunnels and things to dig up. Well, there's people that are protecting that. I forget that guy's name in Egypt, but he's basically he's like the Secretary of Archaeology, and he basically says you can't dig. You're not going to dig there. Göbekli Tepe. That's another one in Turkey where they've shut it down. They've created like a tourist trap for it. And they've said no more digging because they started to find things that might actually show us our true history. Why are they protecting us from this?
Well, it's like this, again, it's like that they have a filtered view of history. And what would that do if we started pulling the threads of that and saying, actually, all that we learned in school wasn't right? What would happen?
Right. That kind of like pulls the threads out of society, right? And out of so they no longer have control, because if they're not telling us what's true, we can start to think more for ourselves. start doing more for ourselves and start, coming up with a narrative that actually resonates with us, and that may lead us to not need those leaders anymore, not need what we have in terms of this world's leadership is, it's not the best leadership in the world. We have a lot of wars and corruption and things like that. And if they suddenly fall out of power because everybody realizes they really shouldn't be in power because they're not telling us the truth, well, that's a big deal, right? So they're protecting this for a reason. They're maintaining power, so to maintaining keeping us in a certain place of understanding through schools and everything else to make sure that their control is maintained, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like truth is empowering, right? And ignorance is just a way of keeping everybody in this locked, limited state of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So we're not trying to be like them. We're just telling you what we found. So if this resonates with you, keep listening. If it doesn't resonate with you, go find something else to watch.
But also, yeah, find your own. This is really like the start of perhaps you looking into this and finding your own answers, right? Like that Forbidden Archaeology book. I haven't read it. Gosh, I'd like to though, but it's almost 1,000 pages of evidence that have been unearthed and hidden away. And
maybe we'll have a follow up once we read the book. Once one of us reads the book, we'll figure it out. So the interesting thing is, okay, so we're a hybrid species. We're parts of ET. We're also parts of what you could call a natural species that evolved here as part of a blueprint plan from the Elohim. Well, some of those ET traits actually gave us tremendous potential. What Bashar says is he's fascinated by how limited we are, but we're very powerful underneath. And so what he's saying is the filters of our brains and bodies and what we think we can't do actually keeps us from doing the things we actually could do, and some amazing things. This is starting to shift, as we know. That's why we're here talking to you, because this is starting to shift. Putting coins on the wall, bending spoons. We're starting to realize how powerful we actually are, and many other things with remote viewing, all the psychic gifts that are coming back into the mainstream in a way. But this also gave us some psychological wounds. A lot of people feel unworthy of being here. They have a worthiness issue, and this may be traced back to that Anunnaki DNA that they put within us to help us be more amenable workers for harvesting that gold. And so, we're hypnotherapists, so a lot of times our clients come to us and they just don't feel worthy of being here, and they don't know exactly why. You could say if some of them grew up like, let's say, Catholic, you're told as a Catholic you're not worthy to start with. But most clients are not Catholic. They just have this innate feeling of not being good enough or not being worthy enough. And as I've said, that could be traced back to some of this DNA that was it to make us more more tractable to labor, to work these gold fields. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So let's talk about cycles in general.
all right, yeah.
So we've got people talk about all these cycles coming to an end and a beginning right now, and there's it's convoluted. There's a lot of stuff going on. We did the research for you on the cycles, so we didn't claim to understand all of them ourselves completely. So why don't you talk about the Yuga cycles,
Yugas,
and then we'll shift on to what somebody else found.
Yeah, so the Vedas, which are, these ancient yogic texts from out of India, and they talk about 4 yugas. We have Satya Yuga, which is that age of enlightenment, truth. Everybody was living in harmony. Almost everybody was meditating all the time, and they knew how to work together, and there was really just unification amongst all the peoples. And then,
and how long did that go for?
Well, gosh, there's varying sources that say different numbers, right? So a lot of sources say 1,728,000 years.
That's a long cycle.
Really long, yeah.
But we think of Lucy being 2.3 million years old. Well, now we're starting to line up.
Three
to
4.
3 to 4 million years old.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So now these cycles are starting to make sense that we've had these long cycles of existence here.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So then you've got Treta Yuga. That a lot of the sources say that's 1,296,000 years long, and that's the age of morality, dharma, which is people doing their duty, right? Their spirit. Why are they here? Their spiritual purpose, and then they're acting compassionately. for the most part, people are still living in unity, but there's starting to be a little more diversification and separation.
Okay.
Then you've got Dwapara Yuga. That is 864,000 years long, according to most sources, right? And then that's when you really start to see duality, and it's like a starting to fall apart of that unification.
Okay. So we move into like individualism and separatism and yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you get to really the bottom of the barrel of yugas, Kali Yuga. A lot of people still think we're in Kali Yuga. This is the shortest one, which is still incredibly long, 432,000 years long. It's like the age where most people are ignorant. There's a lot of suffering and materialism because of that ignorance. Leaders are acting criminally. There's so much corruption for personal gain. And so when you look at these yugas and the cycle, it's like 100% pure in Satya Yuga. Treta
Right.
Yuga is 75% pure.
Oh.
Then you get down to 50% in Dwapara Yuga,
Right.
and then Kali Yuga is like 25% pure. So it's a decline, but I like to think about how we learn so much in Kali Yuga, right? All that suffering is like cause
Right.
for change, right?
And we found that these cycles aren't totally agreed upon by all these sages and gurus and so forth. So we've got Sri Yukteswar, who teaches 24,000 year cycles, and this is very similar to the actual wobble of the Earth. The Earth wobbles in 25,772 year cycles, and this is well known by indigenous cultures. They know about the wobble of the Earth and how there's an ascending and descending sector to all of them. So Sri Yukteswar, he says we're in ascending Dwapara.
Dwapara.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Dwapara. Starting, and this actually lines up more with what we're experiencing now. It makes a lot more sense than just beginning that Kali Yuga cycle of darkness, because we're kind of coming out of this. We're coming into the light right now, and so this cycle makes a lot more sense. It's what a lot of people have shifted to. Of like, this makes more sense with what's going on. He said it started in 1900. And it's a 2400 year cycle that goes until 4300 AD. So starting in 1900, so we're just at the beginning of this ascending Dwapara cycle, and so this matches with a lot of what Dolores Cannon's talking about with New and Eckhart Tolle with New Earth. We're in an ascending cycle, and we're going through a major shift right now.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, think about through the span of a few decades, like how many more people are meditating now versus just a few decades ago.
Right. Yeah. People are finding metaphysical, esoteric things all the time. Like they're opening up to spirituality. They're asking, people are kind of asking like, why am I here? Like, what am I doing? Like they're stepping out of that, that kind of phase where we were kind of stuck in that autopilot, like of just like gaining money or materials and living your life that way. It's like, that traditional lifestyle. It's like people are asking, why are we here? Let's talk about the philosophy of it rather than just like cruise through life and go to death. Yeah.
And then, people are more aware of how their choices are impacting others too. Like, I think about like a few decades ago, you couldn't find organic food in the grocery store, or
Right.
like people didn't think much about their diet. It's just like you get the ham and the white bread, and like it doesn't matter.
Eat whatever you feel like is right for your body. We're not saying to change your diet, but it's a fact that there's more vegetarian and vegan options these days. People are looking at the food stream and saying there's some unhealthy stuff going on there in how we create our food these days. So it's all kind of shifting into that. That's gonna be a whole nother episode. But what we want to tell you is like we're shifting it out of a cycle and we're shifting into a new cycle. Interestingly, it goes in reverse zodiac. So when you think about the zodiac, it's like you start with Capricorn in the very beginning of the year, then Aquarius, Pisces. You go around it goes in reverse. The cycles of the wobbling Earth go in reverse zodiac. So basically, for some reason, it starts with Leo, and then it goes to Virgo around the other way. So right now we're shifting from Pisces, which is traditionally, in the terms of a year, Pisces is from February to March. But in this, it's like it's a shift of multiple thousands of years. And so we're shifting from Pisces into Aquarius. And whenever you shift from one into the other, you actually have, Pisces, the aspects of Pisces are kind of grasping a hold, trying to hold on to what's going on. And then the aspects of Aquarius are emerging through and trying to break into this, this new paradigm. And so we're having these two things happen. And so we have a lot of turmoil in the world right now, as you have probably experienced and seen in the news. Don't watch too much news. But, we have this turmoil because we have a shifting of one age ending and another age beginning, and they have very different pieces. So the Piscean age was all about authority and institutions and belief systems. Talk about religions. Our religions are majorly loosening up now. People are kind of shifting to wider beliefs, maybe outside of religion, outside of those heavily like parametered religions.
And what about like the academia and science and stuff? Is
Well,
that part of that institutional belief systems?
Yeah, institutions could be academia. It could be religions. It could be cultural institutions. It could be all sorts of things. So we're talking about things that like kind of been control mechanisms in a way, and we're shifting out of that. Also, hierarchy is another piece of the Piscean age. Hierarchy is like, oh, this person's at a higher level than me. I have to listen to them, and we're not, it's almost like a caste system in India where it's like you're a certain level and that's the level you are, and if there's a person above you, you have to like bow to them and listen to them and follow their orders. Well, we're moving out of that.
I definitely came in to buck out of that hierarchy.
Yes, you did. Same here. And so we're moving into the Aquarian age. I'm an Aquarius, so I love talking about the Aquarian age.
When's the Capricorn age?
That's going to be next. 4300 AD, we're going to be moving into Capricorn.
I'll be back for that.
You're going to come back for that? Okay. So the Aquarian age is all about networks, decentralization, personal sovereignty, direct knowing, and collective intelligence. And so think about this with the internet coming through, the decentralization of, moving away from those institutions, really. Personal sovereignty, like knowing you have personal rights and freedoms. Like look at the last, couple 125 years, 126 years since 1900 are really moving into this. And so we're moving into this ascendancy, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's not like information doesn't just come from top down at this point. It's like from each other.
Right.
And anybody can write a book now.
Right. Right.
So
you can self-publish. Yeah, you can start a podcast.
Yeah.
And you can get your information out, and nobody's going to come after you for doing that. Well, not in the U.S. anyway, but other countries are opening up to that too. Yeah, ideally. Ideally. If you have a really top level clearance and you disappear, well, what has happened? I don't know. Conspiracy theory alert. We won't go there. So, but time. Think about time going all the way back. Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner saw time as a spiral. So essentially, we're coming back. Like, imagine, like, we're here like 25,000 years ago, and then we come and spiral up. Well, we're back in that same point at a different level. We're higher up, but we're back to that same point again in a cycle. So if it's a spiral of like 25,000 years, like this Earth wobble, time is like it's not linear. It's like a spiral, and that's why we're seeing these cycles that come through that might emulate cycles from so many years ago, 25,000 years ago. And so these cycles represent that spiral, and you might have a lot of overlap between I got a little bug flying around me. You might have a lot of overlap between that point 25,000 years ago and that point right now. So let's shift a little bit. Let's talk about the early civilizations of Earth that we know about. We're taught that civilization started, way back with the Egyptians and Sumerians, and perhaps back in, the Middle East somewhere. We're taught that it just started just recently, just back in, 6,000 BC. That is not what we're finding when we talk about all these other, we look at all these other pieces of information. And it's not just channelers. We have people like Graham Hancock, who's, done some of this research to look into the archaeology that's beyond what is in the textbooks. So what we're finding is there was a civilization, and this goes back to this goes back to what you were talking about with the cycles and unity. But some people call it Lemuria, but Lemuria is a poor name for what's actually called Mu. Mu is a civilization. It was more of a way of being than a civilization. So the Muians, if we can call them that, the people of Mu, let's call them the people of Mu. People of Mu, they began in like in the area around it's around the Pacific Ocean, kind of between Asia and North America in a way. There was a continent there, and so they were really heavy into the feminine energy versus masculine energy. So they were a state of consciousness more than a civilization. So it was really not a civilization. It was not considered a civilization like we are now or like Atlantis was. This is like a state of consciousness. They didn't identify as a civilization. They're very heart centered. They lived in harmony. This is all kind of going back to that first
Satya Yuga.
the Satya Yuga. So
Yeah.
so this kind of lines up with that. They were spiritually advanced, and they didn't have as much technology. So they were more into spirit, harmony, living with nature. So think about like, this is kind of perpetuated by some indigenous cultures, the Maori, and the people that have lived like there's still some cultures in Brazil. There's still some places that they live with the earth. They live in harmony with the earth, and they're more in that spiritual realm, and they don't abhor technology, but they don't really want to step into technology as much as some people have. This is kind of that same nature, and they were there for a long time. They used telepathy to communicate. They were deeply connected to consciousness and energy, and they were less hierarchical than we are now, or than the Atlanteans were. They were more like, everybody is evenly situated within their class status and things like that. So they experienced, for whatever reason, they experienced a slow decline. The consciousness changed, and so gradually, as the consciousness changed, the land gradually subsided. And my understanding from multiple sources is that the land kind of like started to imagine this is a continent. It started to shift, and imagine Asia's here. Well, this part started to go under, and so the people gradually moved east, and they kept moving east as the land subsided. And this was due to volcanic activity, tectonic plate shifts, and rising oceans, as well as just land subsidence. The land was just sinking into the ocean, and they kept moving east and moving east and moving east, and Atlantis actually started to come into power while Mu was kind of going out of power, and so we're kind of losing what they had. So the people kept moving east, 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 and eventually, if you know where Mount Shasta is in California, it's in California. It's on the west coast of the U.S., and Mount Shasta is where they ultimately decided to shift under Mount Shasta and create a city called Telos. Now that may sound crazy to you, but they were very in touch with nature. They were very in touch with spirit, and they basically shifted into light bodies and went into the earth and live in a city underneath Mount Shasta called Telos, likely in a different dimension. So if you actually went down and drilled down under Mount Shasta, you would not likely find, the people of Mu. But they are still there working, evidently. And Mount Shasta has a very interesting power, and it has a very strong vortex, which is a feminine vortex. So it's taking energy in, whereas a place like Sedona is a masculine vortex, and it pushes energy out of the earth. So interestingly, it's kind of like encapsulated that feminine energy of bringing the energy into the mountain. And weird things happen on that mountain. If you've ever been to Mount Shasta and you didn't have something weird happen, well, that's weird to me, because it seems like everybody that goes there has something strange happen to them. I went there and I had many strange things happen to me while around and on Mount Shasta. Fantastic place to go. Just be ready for something a little strange. Don't be let your expectations go, but be ready for something that might not be within the five physical senses. So, what happened after Mu? After Mu kind of went down and Atlantis started to rise. Is there anything you want to say about Atlantis?
No, you're on a roll. You're doing really great.
So as Mu faded, Atlantis rose, and started to come to power. And Atlantis is another continent, and this continent was essentially between the U.S. on the east coast and Africa, and there was a continent in the ocean. So Atlantis, they started to rise to power, and they were all about intellect and power, and they were very psychically gifted. They used that kind of power to shape stone. They could actually make stone into like a liquid and then reform it into blocks that they wanted. And some say this is how the pyramids were built. And there's also a pyramid in Atlantis that actually was destroyed. But there's pyramids all around the world. Some of them are still hidden, and they were all built this way, with shaping stones and then replacing them with energy. There wasn't these crazy like ramps and 200 years of building. It was like they were doing it with energy and large groups of people using energy together. But this was technology to them. So it was like psychic technology, but they were shifting into materialism and experimentation, and they became the dominant civilization. They became a civilization, and they were in power for a long time.
You know, the the Vedas, going back to that, talked about how yogis were able to chant mantras to fly ships through the air and move things, and so it's like that sound resonance
Right,
is super powerful.
right,
And I heard recently that it's like all these psychic abilities, everybody had them, but then in order to, as populations expanded, it became uh, a challenge to our survival to keep psychic abilities.
right. Well, the consciousness of the Earth like diminished over time. It actually, like, the Earth is responsible for how much consciousness we're allowed to experience, how much psychic ability we can experience. My understanding is the Earth was sunsetting that because of the way it was being used. So the Atlanteans got to a very powerful point where they were flying machines around. You hear the myths of like the flying carpet. That was a way for them to transport themselves and items with them rather than just flying themselves. They would make the carpet fly with energy. It wasn't magic; it was just energy, and they would just transport themselves with some. No, I'm going to dinner. I'm going to bring a bottle of wine and something else. I'll get on my carpet and I'll fly over there and go do that. And they were using those abilities to really help advance themselves and make life more easy. They were able to heat their homes with crystals. They used a lot of crystal technology, shaped blocks. So they were using psychic ability well beyond the best thing we've seen today. However, we are stepping back into it. So I think we will get back there, and we're shifting back into that. But they learned a lesson. They learned a lesson along the way because they were ultimately destroyed. Well, how were they destroyed? Why were they destroyed? So what they were doing was they started doing genetic modification. They were starting to create hybrids between animals and people. So you ever hear myths of like centaurs and minotaurs? These were beings that Atlanteans were actually creating, and they were creating them for labor and for sport. And so they would actually think about the Colosseum with gladiators, back in the Roman days. Well, they were doing this with these animals and having them, fight each other, fight humans, and essentially kind of going in the negative direction with this, genetic modification. They were not doing good things. They were warned, and there was warnings that came, and some of them, just like any civilization, any culture, some of them were very positive and loving, and they were actually warned when they meditated. They understood, oh, this place is going to be destroyed because we're going the wrong direction. And they tried to warn the people in power, but the people in power didn't listen because they were absorbed in their power. They were doing these things. They were having fun. They were hurt. Basically combining animals with people, doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and they were like, they just wanted more and more power. And so ultimately, they got destroyed. So how'd they get destroyed? Well, my understanding is a comet came and hit Atlantis directly. And so over the course of 4 to 5 days, we had tidal waves, and people talk about this flood. All over the world, people talk about this flood.
It's on like every myth.
Major flood that was like 12,800 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
And
like
so
every culture is a flood
every
myth.
culture has a flood myth. And
Yeah.
so there's a reason for that. And so some of the people that knew it was coming managed to escape and went to places like Egypt and South America and, all around the world where they were able to continue trying their practice. But ultimately that comet came in, destroyed it. Over 4 to 5 days, the whole continent was destroyed, shifted, some of it shifted apart, broke apart, and shifted in the oceans to different parts of, basically, it went east and west. So if you think about we actually have examples of this. If anybody's ever been or looked up Bimini Road, it's a road that's paved with giant blocks under the Bahamas. And so if you look up pictures of that, you'll see these giant blocks that looked almost impossibly sized, creating a very straight road, and it's like maybe 18 feet under the ocean. And this was actually this was actually shown to be true by Edgar Cayce back in the 1960s. He said this was there. Nobody had found it yet. And so divers went, on his words, and found it only a handful of years later, like 1968. And so he had predicted this in one of his readings in 1960. And by 1968, they found it, and they were like, this is exactly what he said. He said this is part of Atlantis. Now go all the way over to the east. So that's in the west of Atlantis, because that's over in the Bahamas. That's on the western side of where it was. The eastern side, shifted all the way into the Sahara Desert. So you've got the reshot. The reshot is like a giant concentric looking thing in the middle of the desert. It looks like concentric circles, and some channelers and some people have said that this was the capital city of Atlantis, and so there was like a canal that went into it, and I'll post a resource in the comments. But there's a canal that went into it, and it had concentric canals.
Concentric?
Concentric. Did I say, what did I say?
Concentric?
Concentric. Which one is it?
Concentric.
Concentric canals. Concentric circles forming canals and land masses, going in and out. And so it would be like a canal, then a landmass, then a canal. And the city was built on the land masses, and the canals were used for, seagoing activities. They also evidently brought whales in, and then were working with the whales to do whatever they do with communicating with whales. Whales are special for some reason. I don't know why that is. I should know more about that. But so you can look this up. It's on Google Maps or Google Earth. Look up, the reshot in the Sahara Desert. It's in the middle of the desert now. There's nothing there, but they found evidence that this was a lush area. This was a place of, lots of growth. There was water there at one point, and so this all shifted after this major cataclysm that came. So the cataclysm was brought about by what? Well, my understanding is through Dolores Cannon. She says some people come here and they actually have a piece of their mission here is to cause a cataclysm if things don't go the right direction. She actually met somebody who went into hypnosis and said, I'm here to help with the cataclysm of today if things don't go well in this day and age.
So behave yourselves.
And there's evidently like a few hundred of them, and they all work together, probably subconsciously without even knowing what they're doing. But at some point, if the trigger is switched and they're told you need to destroy, they actually somehow energetically are able to cause the cataclysm to happen. And this is what was told to her, what happened in Atlantis. So there was people that evidently were there, that were living in Atlantis or around the world, that a trigger got switched in them, and they said, okay, you have to do your mission now. Your mission you came in for was to be aware for this, and if it happens, you have to do the energetic response. And so they all worked together to bring this comet down on Atlantis, cause the cataclysm, cause these floods, and destroy Atlantis because it was going in the wrong direction. We had to have a little reset button pushed so we could continue growing and learning and try to get back to that wisdom, because they were using power without wisdom. And when you use power without wisdom, you kind of get what you get in Atlantis. You start going in the wrong direction.
Seems like we're using power without wisdom.
Yes. So we're kind of following the Atlanteans in some ways. However, I think we are moving back into that, what the people of Mu were doing in terms of that unity. I think we're learning that that's what's necessary, and we're going to get help. I believe we're going to get help from the ETs when they come down and we have disclosure, and they're going to say, hey, these are the things you're doing well, and these are the things you're not doing so well, and here's how you can work with Earth better. Because my understanding is we're not allowed to have that reset happen again. Like it's too important, and there's too many things tied to Earth's survival and humanity's survival to have us do the reset button again. So they really want us to move forward, and they're actually willing to bend some of their rules of like never intervene. They're actually going to come down and be like, hey, we need to help you guys a little bit because we can't reset again. There's too much at stake that is beyond humanity that you would impact by doing this. So yes, left to our own devices, we may not have done it ourselves, but we're kind of going in the right direction now. So we'll see what happens in the next handful of years as we go through this change. Yeah. So lots of good stuff. So where are we at now? We're at the end of Atlantis, right?
End of Atlantis.
The end of Atlantis. And so, what happens to the survivors? They're all around the world. They continue using their psychic abilities, but consciousness itself is kind of dimming in a way. So those psychic abilities there's just not the atmosphere for those anymore. And Earth creates an atmosphere to make that possible. Earth itself has an energy. So my understanding is that energy was sunsetting. And so that not only were the teachings and the practices lost because they were so diversified across the Earth, but slowly that psychic ability was just muted. And so people maybe the next generation wasn't able to do it the same as the previous generation. And eventually they were like, we can't even do this at all. What are we doing this for? And ultimately, fast forward 12,500 years and here we are today. We gradually lost all the psychic ability. And then through those control mechanisms of religion and institutions, we were told psychic ability is really bad. Don't do it. That's the devil coming through or whatever. That's like something really negative, because if they allowed us to do that, then they'd allow us to think more for ourselves. And so it's been tamped out of civilization for a long time. So imagine, being a healer in the Middle Ages, and you're burned at the stake. You weren't able to procreate. You were healing people and having a great life, and then the church came and killed you and burned you at the stake because you were channeling the devil or something. Well, as that DNA is kind of like tamped down, and people don't want to use it because they're afraid of it. Well, then it gets kind of put into like a dormant state in a way, and so that DNA is within us. It's somewhat dormant, and it's time to bring it back to life. So I feel like that's where we are today, bringing that DNA back to life. So we've gone through these cycles, and now it's time to reawaken that DNA, put those pennies on the wall or coins on the wall, bend those spoons, and try doing things. Have a spiritual practice, do a little meditation, and step into this stuff, because you'll be I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at what you're actually capable of when you let yourself be capable of it. Our belief systems are so powerful, and so we have to get beyond what we're taught. And once you get beyond what you're taught and allow for another outcome, that outcome could very well happen. So, anything to add to that?
Well, it seems like a lot of other species that live in groups have telepathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because we have developed language to express ourselves, maybe we've gotten weaker with telepathy, but it's like those birds that fly in flocks that they all are in sync with each other, and horses
Schools of fish.
yeah, horses
Yeah.
galloping together, and they all can turn at the same time and nobody gets trampled. It's just they know when a predator's around. Like one horse notices it and everybody's alert to it immediately, and so it's like this is a natural ability, and we've just forgotten it because it's very convenient. We just learn to speak and then express, and so there's not a reason. But like a lot of people have signs of telepathy. They know somebody's gonna call before the phone rings,
Right.
or like we finish each other's sentences sometimes. Like
All the time.
some people know what their partner's doing, even if they're not in the same building, right? And so yeah,
And it's back on the rise.
yeah.
I mean, telepathy tapes. A little nudge for telepathy tapes. Thank you, Kai. It's a wonderful podcast to listen to, and it talks about how telepathy is back on the rise. These autistic kids are using it, especially these non-speaking kids are using telepathy to meet with each other on a place called the Hill. And my understanding is these autistic children and these autistic people that are coming into Earth now are here to help with this shift, and they're here to actually lead us into what we should be doing. They're all heart-centered, and they all just have so much love for humanity. And just because they can't communicate with us in the way that we're used to sometimes, it just means they're built differently. They're built in a way that's actually preparing us for what they're doing rather than them for what. So they shouldn't be matching what we're doing and we shouldn't be trying to fit them into a shoebox that we already have. We should be trying to fit ourselves into what they've created, because they're actually creating this new paradigm for us where telepathy will be the way we communicate. They're here to teach, they're here to lead, and they are just absolutely beautiful beings who have just their heart center as their compass in a way. And so this is all kicking off. There's animal telepathists. There's people that have just learned telepathy. There's that guy that had his wife. She had Alzheimer's. He started talking telepathically to her before she passed, and was able to really improve his life and her life by being able to communicate with her at a soul level, even though at a physical level they were not able to communicate. So yeah, this is all coming back to the forefront, right?
And I think it's because we're realizing what consciousness is, and that we're part of consciousness, right? That it's not that we have consciousness, it's that we are consciousness, that we are divine, it's not that we are like descended from the divine. We are. And so when you start to realize that like consciousness is everywhere, then it's that's how you have telepathy. Oh, the communication goes through consciousness.
Right.
That's how remote viewing works. Oh, my consciousness expands out to find the information. Or that's how you can bend the spoon or put the coin on the wall because it's consciousness interacting with consciousness and it's all connected.
Right, it's all connected. It's all
Yeah.
consciousness. And we are all part of the divine. And if we're all part of the divine is one. Of course, we can talk with ourselves through telepathy,
Yeah.
talking with ourselves through telepathy. So just know that you are a spark of that divinity. You are that a spark here to express themselves as you came in. So express yourself in whatever way you feel you like to, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else. Do that expression. Express yourself in celebration, unapologetically. Have fun with it because that's really what brings that beauty into the world. Uh, you know, be here and one more thing is, we've come a long way from, the earliest people to now, and now we're waking up again. So now it's time to remember that stuff and come back to that stuff. So what we know is that what you think, not just what you do, not just your actions, but your thoughts actually are co-creating. And so if you're somebody who is a little bit of a negative person or you think negatively, you could really clean up your negative thinking. And, if you catch 1 out of 1,000, what I recommend is, catching that negativity. You can catch it and say, oh, I just thought negatively about myself. Give yourself a little piece of gratitude for catching it. Take a breath, let it out nice and slow, and then rephrase it either out loud or in your head in the positive. And it's a great little game you can play with yourself to, if you, like I said, if you only catch 1 in 1,000, great, you got a good start. Just start thinking positively, because if what you're thinking about is what we're creating as humanity, then we're all responsible for what's going to happen. And so the more we think positively and the more we can put our positive spin on it, the better outcome we're all going to have. So we're all in this together, we're all one, but we can all do our individual part in this expression of ourselves to bring about this shift in Earth, this wonderful shift into this paradise that we're moving towards. So let's work together. Let's do it. All right, I think that wraps it up, don't you?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you all. Thank you for supporting us. We'll be back with our next episode probably in the next few weeks. So thanks so much. I'm Steve.
I'm Morgan. Thank you so much for exploring with us today here at Aware and Awake.
While these topics can feel sensitive, they help us reconnect with who you truly are. We encourage you to express yourself genuinely, safely, and in celebration of your uniqueness.
And we all deserve to both give and receive love, so love yourself, love your fellow souls, and love this magical place we call Earth. And if this video resonated with you, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel and share this video with a friend.
We're all in this together, and these simple actions can make a huge difference. So from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you.